What would you do if the home you built your entire life around, the place where your kids took their first steps, where you fixed every broken faucet with your own hands, where laughter echoed during family barbecues, was stolen from you? Not by thieves in the night, not by a bank after missed mortgage payments, but by your very own neighbors, the people you waved to every morning. I never thought it could happen to me. Ordinary man, construction worker, just a husband and a father trying to give his family a good life. But on one humid summer evening, when the crickets buzzed and the sun was sliding low behind the rooftops, I came home to a piece of paper taped to my front door. The tape cracked as I peeled it off. My boots were still dusty from work. The air smelled faintly of gasoline from a neighbor's down the street. At first glance, I thought it was some flyer or community notice. But the bold black words stopped me cold. Eviction notice, foreclosure pending. My heart thudded. Foreclosure? That didn't make sense. I had paid off my mortgage years ago. The house was mine. I built a life here with my wife since the day we signed the deed in our 20s. 20 years, 2 kids, countless memories, and now a piece of paper saying it was all gone. I remember stepping out onto the porch, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel, asking what it was. Her voice was calm, but I could see the panic in her eyes before I even spoke. I didn't have words, just silence. Only the sound of the wooden gate creaking in the breeze. The next morning, I stormed into the HOA office. It wasn't much more than a small, converted room at the back of the community center, fluorescent lights humming above. Sitting there was Karen, the new HOA president everyone already whispered about. Sharp smile, tapping her pen like she'd been waiting for me. I slapped the notice down on the desk. "This has to be a mistake." She tilted her head, voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Well, according to our records, you haven't paid your dues in 6 months. My chest tightened. I had autopay set up years ago, every month without fail. I told her that. She smirked, sliding a folder across the desk. Rows of numbers, all zeros under the column marked paid. I pulled out my phone right there, logging into my account. And she was right. No payments had gone through. My mind scrambled. How? Why? And then it hit me months ago I'd lost my wallet on a bike ride, canceled the card, ordered a new one. I never reconnected the payment. It felt like ice water poured down my back. I tried to explain, honest mistake. The kind of thing anyone could overlook. Karen didn't budge, her voice sharpened like a blade. "Mr. Davis, rules are rules. You owe 6 months plus penalties. That totals $7,000. If you can't pay, the foreclosure proceeds." 7,000. I didn't have it. Not sitting in a savings account, not tucked away in a jar somewhere. I pleaded, asked for a grace period, a payment plan, even just a warning call before all of this. She leaned back in her chair, satisfied, like she'd been waiting for this moment. "We sent emails. We sent texts. If you didn't see them, that's not our problem." I went home that night broken. My kids, Jacob and, asked why their mom looked like she'd been crying. I couldn't bring myself to answer. The dinner table, usually filled with chatter, was silent except for the clink of forks against plates. I kept staring at the walls, the ceiling, the chipped paint on the staircase I had promised I'd fix. Every corner of that house held our life, and it was slipping through my fingers. I barely slept. The sound of the fridge humming in the dark, the faint tick of the hallway clock, the occasional creak of wood settling, all of it reminded me this was home, and I was about to lose it. But here's the thing. Something deep down in me whispered this wasn't just bad luck. Something didn't smell right. Because if it was really about unpaid dues, why was Karen smiling when she told me my house was being foreclosed? Why did she look victorious? At the time, I didn't know the truth. I didn't know how deep this would go. I just knew that in the middle of my ordinary life, a storm had started, and it wasn't going to pass quietly. They say the worst kind of betrayal isn't from strangers. It's from the people you thought you could trust. When I bought that house 20 years ago, I thought the HOA was there to protect us, to keep the neighborhood safe, clean, welcoming. For a long time, it felt that way. The board was made up of retirees, folks who cared about the community. They patched potholes, sent out newsletters about block parties, even helped settle neighbor disputes with a firm but fair hand. But the old board retired, and in their place came a new group, people my age, ambitious, sharp-dressed, and eager to modernize. At first, I gave them the benefit of the doubt. Change is always awkward, but something about Karen, the new president, had always put me on edge. The way she spoke down to people, the way she cut conversations short when she decided she'd heard enough. It was like she believed she owned the entire neighborhood. I should have trusted my gut. The morning after that meeting in the HOA office, I sat at the kitchen table with the blinds let in strips of early sunlight, dust floating in the air. My coffee went cold while she kept her hand over mine, trying to stop it from trembling. "We'll figure something out," she said softly, but her eyes told me she was just as scared as I was. $7,000. To a man working construction, that wasn't pocket change. That was months of overtime, that was college savings, that was money we didn't have. Still, I tried. I went to the bank, explained everything. The banker shook his head before I'd even finished. "I'm sorry, but HOA foreclosures move fast, faster than mortgage foreclosures. If they've filed, there's not much we can do." Faster, that word rattled in my skull like a warning bell. Within a week, a second notice came. Same paper, same heavy tape pressed to the door. This time, the date was set. If the dues weren't paid, the house would be taken and auctioned. I remember standing there, holding that notice, when Jacob came home from college for the weekend. He walked up the driveway, backpack slung over one shoulder, a smile on his face. It faded the second he saw me. "What's wrong?" he asked. I didn't know how to tell him. How do you tell your son, the boy you raised in this house, that the walls around him were about to be sold to the highest bidder because of a clerical mistake and a ruthless neighbor? So I said nothing, just crumpled the notice in my fist and shoved it into my pocket, but silence has weight, and I could feel my children start to carry it. The following days blurred. Phone calls, letters, meetings, every time the same smirk from Karen, the same cold tone from the treasurer. Rules are rules. Neighbors started whispering. I could feel their eyes on me when I walked to the mailbox. Some were sympathetic, offering awkward smiles, murmured condolences. Others avoided me altogether, as if foreclosure was contagious. One evening, as I was repairing the loose gate hinge, the same gate that had creaked for years, I saw old Mrs. from across the street. She shuffled over, cane tapping against the pavement. Her voice was hushed when she spoke. "They did the same thing to me," she said. "Raised fees without notice, said I missed payments. I almost lost my house too, but my son bylaid me out." I stared at her, stunned. "What do you mean the same thing?" Her eyes darted toward Karen's house, then back to me. "Don't talk here," she whispered, and then she shuffled away, leaving me with more questions than answers. That night, lying awake beside, I thought about her words. The same thing. Was this really just my mistake, or was something darker going on? Days later, the final notice arrived. Auction date set. Our house, the home I built for my family, was about to be sold off for pennies compared to its worth. Cried in the kitchen when I told her. Slammed her bedroom door and wouldn't speak to me for hours. I felt like I'd failed them all. But anger has a way of waking you up. Somewhere between the tears, the shame, and the exhaustion, a new thought began to form. If this had happened to me and to Mrs., who else? The night before the auction, I couldn't sleep. I laced up my boots, stepped outside, and walked the streets of the neighborhood I had once loved. Porch lights glowed. Curtains fluttered. I saw homes I knew well, places where we'd shared meals, fixed fences together, watched each other's kids grow. And I wondered how many of them were about to lose it all just like me. That's when I made a decision. If they were going to take my house, they weren't going to take my dignity. And if there was a pattern here, I was going to find it. The next morning, I stood on the courthouse steps, watching strangers file inside for the auction. Bidders in suits clutching folders. The smell of cigarettes clung to the air. I stayed outside, heart heavy, unable to watch my home sold off. It didn't take long. Within hours, a neighbor texted me, "It's done, your house sold, $50,000. $50,000 for a house worth 10 times that." And here's the part that made my blood run cold. The buyer was Karen. What kind of person smiles while stealing the roof over your head? When I found out Karen had bought my house at auction for $50,000, I didn't know whether to scream, cry, or collapse. 50,000. The number circled in my head like a vulture. That house was worth $500,000. I'd spent 2 decades keeping it alive, brick by brick, memory by memory, and now it was gone, just like that. I tried to be strong for Jacob. But the night after the auction, I sat alone in the empty living room, the walls bare, the carpet marked where our couch had been. The silence pressed in. The sound of the faint laughter of children playing down the street. It all made me feel like a ghost in a place that had already moved on without me. When the movers came, I carried boxes with dust sticking to my palms, every creak of the floorboards reminding me I might never hear them again. Tried to keep busy, labeling boxes, wiping down counters, folding curtains. But her shoulders shook when she thought I wasn't looking. We ended up at her parents' house. I was grateful they welcomed us, but nothing strips a man of his pride faster than bringing his wife and grown children back under someone else's roof. Every squeak of the guest bed reminded me of failure. Weeks passed. I worked longer hours, overtime when I could get it. At night, exhaustion wrapped around me, but sleep never came easy. Instead, I'd stare at the ceiling, wondering how I let this happen. Then one morning, my phone buzzed. A text from Mike, an old neighbor I'd traded tools with over the years. He wasn't the type to chat often, so when he asked to grab coffee, I knew something was up. We met at a little diner off the highway, the kind with sticky menus and a bell that jingled when you walk in. I remember the smell of burnt bacon grease and weak coffee. Mike sat there, stirring sugar into his cup, eyes darting toward the door before he spoke. "They almost got me too," he said. I frowned. "Got you how?" "Foreclosure, said I owed fees I never heard of, hidden charges, late penalties for payments I made on time. I thought it was my mistake at first. But then," he leaned closer, his voice dropping, "I started asking around. Turns out a lot of folks are in the same boat, especially the older ones. They're targeting us." My stomach sank. Targeting. He nodded. "I fought mine, caught the treasurer in a lie about the dates. That's the only reason I still have my place. But your house, Mrs. almost lost hers. The Millers down the street did lose theirs. Same story. Fees no one knew about. No warnings, just foreclosure papers." I sat back, the diner's vinyl booth sticking to my arms. The pieces clicked into place. My lost wallet, the canceled card, the payments that never went through, sure, that was on me. But the lack of warnings, the foreclosure moving so fast, the house selling for a fraction of its value right into Karen's hands, that wasn't bad luck. That was a plan. Anger burned through the shame that had weighed me down. My whole life, I'd believed if you worked hard, stayed honest, kept your head down, life would be fair. But this was theft dressed up in paperwork. "Why didn't anyone say anything?" I asked, my voice louder than I meant. A couple of heads turned from nearby tables. Mike sighed. "People are scared. HOA's got power, they threaten fines, lawsuits, and let's be honest, most folks don't want to fight, they just pack up and leave." I left that diner with a storm inside me. For days, I couldn't focus. Every hammer I swung at work, every nail I drove, my thoughts circled back to Karen, her smirk, her pen tapping on that desk, the way she said, "Rules are rules." But rules work both ways. One night, sitting at the kitchen table in my in-laws' house, placed her hand on mine. "You can't just let this go," she whispered. "Not just for us, for everyone." She was right. So I called a lawyer. I still remember sitting in that stuffy office, the faint smell of paper and old carpet, the lawyer's glasses sliding down his nose as he listened to my story. He didn't interrupt, just nodded, scribbling notes. When I finished, he leaned back, fingers steepled. "They broke the law," he said plainly. My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" "HOAs are required by statute to notify members 3 times before initiating foreclosure. Certified mail, documented attempts. If you got nothing, if they can't prove it, then this was an illegal foreclosure." Illegal? The word lit something inside me. I told him about about Mike, about the whispers in the neighborhood. His eyes narrowed. If they're doing this to multiple people, it's not just negligence, it's fraud. I left his office with more than hope. I left with a plan. For the first time in months, I felt my spine straighten, my chest expand. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a man about to fight back. But even as I drove home, windows rolled down, cool night air whipping through, a chill lingered. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't going to be simple. Karen wasn't just a bully with a clipboard. She was dangerous. She'd already taken my house. What else was she willing to take to protect her scheme? What happens when the people who make the rules are the same ones breaking them? That question haunted me the night I filed my lawsuit against the HOA. Sitting at the kitchen table in my in-laws' house, the glow of a single lamp lit the papers spread before me. My hands shook as I signed. My name, scrawled in blue ink, suddenly felt like a weapon. For months, I'd been powerless. That night, for the first time, I felt like I'd picked up a sword. Stood behind me, her hands resting on my shoulders. Her voice was steady, though I could hear the fear beneath it. Once you start this, there's no going back. I nodded, I know. The next morning, the suit was filed. Wrongful foreclosure, fraud, failure to provide required notices. My lawyer was calm, almost casual as he explained the process, but my stomach churned. This wasn't just about paperwork anymore. This was about taking on the people who had stolen everything from me and might try to do worse if they were cornered. Word spread fast. By the end of the week, neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months were whispering my name at the mailbox, at the grocery store, even at church. Some offered quiet support. Others warned me to be careful. Karen doesn't lose, one man muttered before quickly walking away. But a strange thing began to happen. People started coming forward, first Mike, then Mrs., then a couple I barely knew who lived 3 streets over. Each had their own story, fees they'd never heard of, charges that didn't make sense, foreclosure notices that came out of nowhere. It wasn't just me. It wasn't just bad luck. This was a pattern. And when we took those stories to my lawyer, his expression hardened. "This is bigger than we thought," he said. "We're not just fighting for you, we're fighting for every family they've bled dry." The first court date felt surreal. I remember walking up the courthouse steps in a stiff suit that didn't quite fit, the sound of my shoes echoing against the stone. Inside, Karen sat at the defense table, hair perfectly styled, lips painted sharp red. The treasurer sat beside her, flipping through papers like he had nothing to fear. But when the judge called the case, I saw something flicker across Karen's face. Not fear, something else. Contempt, like she couldn't believe I'd dared to challenge her. The early hearings were slow. Legal jargon, motions and counter-motions. Half the time I barely understood what was happening. But I understood one thing: Karen and the treasurer weren't just defending themselves. They were covering something up. Evidence trickled in. Emails that didn't exist on my account suddenly appeared in the HOA's files. Notices I never received were stamped sent. My lawyer tapped the papers with his pen and said flatly, "These are forgeries." The judge ordered an investigation. That's when the cracks started showing. One evening, I got a call from Mike. His voice was urgent, hushed. "They're shredding papers," he whispered. "I saw them hauling boxes out of the HOA office late last night." I relayed it to my lawyer, who filed a motion first thing in the morning. Subpoenas went out. Suddenly, the HOA board wasn't just under scrutiny, they were under siege. The investigation revealed what many of us had suspected but couldn't prove. The foreclosures were deliberate. Hidden fees, false records, warnings that were never sent. Entire families stripped of their homes because Karen and her treasurer had figured out a way to turn hardship into profit. And the profits, they weren't going back into the neighborhood. They were going straight into Karen's pocket. I'll never forget the day the evidence was laid out in court. Rows of documents projected onto a screen. Emails between Karen and the treasurer joking about easy pickings. Lists of houses marked for foreclosure like prey on a hunting map. I sat there, fists clenched, every muscle tight. Around me, neighbors gasped. Mrs. dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Even the judge's expression darkened. Karen shifted in her seat, her painted smile cracking for the first time. But here's the thing about people like her: they don't go down easy. She tried to turn it back on me. Her lawyer stood, voice booming, accusing me of negligence, irresponsibility, even conspiracy. They painted me as the villain who didn't pay his dues, who now sought revenge on the innocent. For a moment, I felt the old shame rising, the weight of those missed payments, the embarrassment of moving back into my in-laws' house. But then I looked at, sitting in the front row, her eyes locked on mine, and I remembered the truth. I wasn't fighting just for myself. I was fighting for all of us. The hearing dragged on for weeks. Every day I walked into that courtroom, my boots polished, my head held high, even when my stomach twisted with dread. Every evening I came home to Quiet's strength, to Jacob's determination, to whispered, "I'm proud of you, Dad." And slowly the tide turned. Neighbors' documents piled up. The pattern became undeniable. And the more truth came out, the clearer it became. Karen's empire was built on lies. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was coming. Because people like Karen don't surrender, they strike back. And I was about to find out just how far she was willing to go. You don't realize how dangerous someone is until you threaten what they love most. For Karen, it wasn't her family or her reputation. It was her power. And the moment the investigation began pulling back the curtain on her scheme, she came after me with everything she had. It started small. Late-night phone calls. I'd pick up and hear nothing but silence, just the faint sound of breathing before the line clicked dead. At first, I thought it was a prank, but when it happened 3 nights in a row, always around the same time, my skin crawled. Then came the letters, plain envelopes, no return address, slipped under my in-laws' door. Inside, newspaper clippings about foreclosure auctions, phrases underlined in red. "You'll lose everything. This is what happens to liars." Found the third one before I did. She didn't say anything, just handed it to me, her hands trembling. The intimidation was working. My in-laws grew nervous, stopped walking alone at night. Even Jacob, usually calm, told me in a low voice, "Dad, maybe it's not worth it." But it was, because if I backed down now, then Karen had already won. Still, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't scared. There were nights I lay awake listening for footsteps outside, every creak of the old house making my chest tighten. Once, I swore I saw headlights parked at the end of the street for hours, engine idling before finally pulling away. I told my lawyer, who shook his head grimly. "Classic intimidation. Don't engage. Document everything." So I did. I kept the letters in a folder, logged the calls, even noted the strange cars that seemed to linger too long outside. But Karen wasn't satisfied with shadows. She wanted a spectacle. The next HOA meeting, yes, she still held them like a queen ruling from a crumbling throne, was packed. Curious neighbors filled folding chairs, murmurs rippling as I walked in. I felt every eye on me. Karen stood at the front, her smile sharp, voice honeyed. "As many of you know, we're currently dealing with a frivolous lawsuit brought against this association." A few people clapped, others looked uncomfortable. She continued, "This lawsuit threatens to drain funds that should be used for our community, for new playgrounds, for road repairs. Instead, one man, her eyes flicked to me, piercing, seeks to destroy everything we've built because he couldn't follow simple rules." The room buzzed. A couple of heads turned my way. I felt my jaw tighten. She wasn't just lying, she was painting me as the enemy of my own neighbors. I stood slowly. The metal chair scraped against the floor, sharp in the silence. My voice shook at first, but steadied as I spoke. "I paid my dues for 20 years. The only reason I missed payments was because my card changed, and no one warned me, not once. And I'm not the only one, you all know it. Some of you sitting right here have gotten those notices. You've whispered to me about it. You've seen what they're doing." Karen's smile faltered just for a second. I pressed on. "This isn't about me, it's about them. The president and treasurer lining their pockets while families lose their homes. That's the truth." Silence, then somewhere in the back a voice called out, "He's right." It was Mrs., leaning on her cane, her frail voice steady. "They almost took mine too. Don't you dare let them twist this." The room erupted. Some shouted in support, others argued back. Karen banged a gavel against the table, shouting for order, but the spell was broken. People weren't afraid to speak anymore. That night, Karen didn't just lose control of the meeting. She lost control of the narrative. And that's when she got desperate. The retaliation escalated. One morning, I found my truck's tires slashed, deep cuts across the rubber. Another time, a brick smashed the rear window while it sat parked in my in-laws' driveway. The police took reports, but nothing ever came of it. Begged me to be careful. What if it's not just threats next time? She whispered, tears in her eyes. I held her close, my own voice raw. If we stop now, they win, and we lose more than the house. We lose our dignity. The case moved forward, each hearing peeling back more layers of corruption. The forged emails, the fake warning notices, the trail of money siphoned into personal accounts. Piece by piece, the truth came out. But with every piece, Karen's mask cracked further. She stopped smiling in court. She glared instead. Long, hard stares that seemed to burn into me as if promising, this isn't over. And maybe it was. Maybe even if the law caught up with her, the fight would spill outside the courtroom, into the streets, into our homes. But by then, I wasn't afraid anymore, because I'd learned something important. Bullies thrive in silence, in whispers and shadows, but once the light shines, once the truth is spoken aloud, they shrink. And for the first time, I could see Karen shrinking. Some fights drag on quietly like a slow bleed, others explode all at once. Ours did both. By the time the trial began, months had passed since I first signed the lawsuit papers. Months of whispers in the neighborhood, months of retaliation from Karen, months of living out of boxes at my in-laws' house. I thought I'd gotten used to the waiting, to the exhaustion. But when I stepped into that courtroom on the first day of trial, the weight of it all nearly buckled my knees. The room smelled faintly of polish and old paper. Fluorescent lights hummed above. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside my lawyer, trying to steady my breathing. Across the room, Karen sat straight-backed, her red blazer sharp against the bland beige walls. Beside her, the treasurer shuffled papers, his expression unreadable. The judge entered. The room rose. And just like that, everything I'd worked for, the sleepless nights, the broken glass, the whispered encouragement from neighbors, all of it came to a head. The early days were brutal. Karen's attorney painted me as careless, irresponsible. He admits himself he didn't pay his dues, the lawyer boomed, pointing at me like I was on trial for theft. This entire circus exists because one man couldn't handle the consequences of his own mistakes. My stomach twisted. I could feel eyes on me. Neighbors, journalists, strangers who'd come just to watch. Shame tried to crawl back into my chest, but I kept my gaze forward, jaw clenched, waiting. Because I knew the truth was coming. When my lawyer stood, his voice wasn't loud, but it was steady, like a hammer driving nails into wood. This isn't about one man's missed payments. This is about a pattern of corruption, about power abused, about families robbed of their homes through deceit. And then the evidence came. First, the emails. Projected on a large screen, the words glared at the courtroom. Messages between Karen and the treasurer joking about low-hanging fruit and easy pickings. Conversations about raising fees without notice. Even one chilling line from Karen herself, he'll never see it coming. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. My heart pounded in my ears. Then came the witnesses. Mrs., frail but fierce, describing how she'd nearly lost her home to phantom fees. Mike, voice steady as he recounted the lies he'd caught the treasurer in. Other neighbors too, one after another, each story a brick in the wall of evidence stacking against the HOA. Karen's mask slipped further with every testimony. She shifted in her seat, her smile brittle, her eyes darting toward the jury like she could will them to forget what they'd heard. But the most damning blow came from the forensic expert. He that the warning emails the HOA claimed to have sent were forged. The timestamps didn't match. The metadata revealed they'd been created after my foreclosure had already begun. The room went silent as the words sank in. Forged, fabricated, lies dressed up as truth. I closed my eyes for a moment, a rush of emotion flooding through me. Validation, anger, relief. Karen's lawyer tried to fight back, tried to poke holes, question motives, paint the witnesses as confused or bitter. But the evidence was too strong. Every attempt crumbled under the weight of the truth. And then, finally, it was my turn to testify. I walked to the stand, palms damp, throat dry. The clerk swore me in and I sat, trying to ignore the sea of eyes watching. My lawyer's questions were simple. What did the house mean to me? How did I pay my dues? What happened when I lost my wallet, when I canceled my card, when I assumed autopay would cover it? I answered honestly, voice steady, heart heavy. Then came Karen's lawyer. His questions were sharp, designed to cut. You admit you didn't check your account for months. Yes, I said. You admit you didn't update your payment method. Yes. Then isn't it true you have no one to blame but yourself? I paused, looked at the jury, and spoke. Yes, I should have checked. I should have updated. But this isn't about one mistake. This is about a system that preyed on that mistake. About leaders who saw an opportunity and chose greed over community. About neighbors who lost everything because the people they trusted decided their homes were worth more as profit than as memories. The courtroom was silent. I stepped down, my legs trembling, but my chest lighter than it had been in months. The trial stretched on for days, but the outcome felt clearer with each one. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the foreperson's voice was steady. Guilty of wrongful foreclosure, guilty of fraud, guilty of conspiracy. Karen's face drained of color. The treasurer's hands shook as he buried his face in them. I exhaled, a sound halfway between a sob and a laugh. Gripped my hand so tightly it hurt, tears streaming down her cheeks. The judge's gavel struck. The HOA was dissolved. Karen and the treasurer were to be criminally investigated for fraud and embezzlement. Justice finally. But as we left the courthouse that day, neighbors patting my back, reporters shouting questions, leaning into me with relief, I couldn't shake one thought. Justice doesn't rebuild a home. It doesn't replace 20 years of memories, and it doesn't erase the scars left by betrayal. I'd won, but the fight had changed me. Some victories don't feel like parades, they feel like funerals. When the gavel came down and Karen was found guilty, people cheered. Reporters scribbled, neighbors whispered, and my lawyer shook my hand with a firm nod. On paper, I won. The scheme was exposed, the HOA dissolved, justice served. But as I walked out of that courthouse into the bright afternoon sun, all I felt was emptiness. Because while Karen faced prison, while the treasurer faced ruin, my house was still gone. I drove back to my in-laws that day with beside me, her hand resting in mine. The windows were down, warm air rushing in, but I couldn't feel it. All I could see were flashes of memory. Jacob learning to ride his bike in our driveway, painting her bedroom walls a terrible shade of purple, planting flowers along the porch. Memories locked inside walls that no longer belonged to me. The days that followed were strange. The neighborhood, once hushed and tense, seemed to exhale for the first time in years. People stopped me at the grocery store, at the gas station, at church. They thanked me, called me brave, said I'd saved them from losing their homes too. And yet, when I returned to my old street, I couldn't bring myself to look at the house. It stood there, neat and perfect, but hollow. Karen had lived in it for weeks after buying it at auction, changing curtains, repainting trim, as if erasing us piece by piece. By the time it was repossessed, it no longer looked like mine, and once it hit the market, its price had soared, far out of reach. I'd saved others, but I couldn't save myself. Mike tried to console me one evening as we sat on his porch, beers sweating in the summer heat. You did more than most people would dared, he said. You ripped the mask off them. That matters. I nodded, but my chest still ached. Yeah, but it doesn't bring the house back. Mrs. joined us for a moment, cane tapping against the boards. She smiled gently. Sometimes justice isn't about getting back what you lost. It's about making sure no one else loses the same way. Her words stayed with me. Life adjusted slowly, and I found a small townhouse on the other side of the city. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, a patch of grass out back, but it was ours and it had no HOA. That alone felt like freedom. I remember the first night we moved in. We didn't have furniture yet, just a mattress on the floor and boxes stacked to the ceiling. Lit a candle in the kitchen and the 2 of us ate takeout straight from the cartons, laughing quietly in the dim light. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace. Jacob and visited when they could. They teased me about how small the place was, but their smiles were warm. And when curled up on the couch one evening, looking around the room, she whispered, "It feels like home, Dad." Those words were worth more than any square footage. Meanwhile, Karen's empire crumbled. The headlines called her the HOA queen gone rogue. Neighbors who once feared her now spoke her name with disgust. The treasurer cut a deal, turning on her to save himself, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. They both faced years behind bars. There was satisfaction in that, but not joy. Because here's the truth no one likes to admit. Justice doesn't heal the wounds, it just stops the bleeding. I'd see reminders everywhere. A stack of old family photos still packed in boxes. Garden tools, unused, leaning in the corner of the garage. The dent in my toolbox where Jacob had dropped a hammer years ago. Relics of a life tied to a house that was gone forever. And yet slowly, new memories formed. Planted flowers in our tiny backyard. Painted her new room, not purple this time, but soft blue. Jacob grilled burgers on the patio one summer night, smoke curling into the sky while we laughed and argued about whose turn it was to flip them. It wasn't the same, but it was something. I started to notice other changes too. Neighbors across the city reached out, asking for advice on fighting their own HOAs. I wasn't just a man who lost his home anymore. I was a man who had stood up, and that gave others courage. And in quiet moments, I realized Mrs. was right. Sometimes the greatest thing you can give the world isn't your own victory, it's the chance for others to avoid your pain. Still, on certain nights when the house was quiet and was asleep beside me, I'd think about the old place. The creak of the stairs, the smell of fresh-cut grass in the backyard, the sound of rain on the roof. Those memories stung, but they also reminded me of something important. A house is wood and nails, but a home is the people inside. And as long as Jacob and still came through the door with their laughter and their love, then maybe, just maybe, I hadn't lost everything after all. Have you ever walked back to a place that used to be yours, only to feel like a stranger? Months after the trial ended, I found myself driving down the old neighborhood street. The trees were taller, the lawns neatly trimmed, kids rode bikes in the cul-de-sac. On the surface, nothing had changed, but for me, everything had. When I stopped at the curb outside my old house, I sat there for a long time, hands gripping the steering wheel. The porch had new railings. The shutters were painted blue instead of white. A young couple was unloading groceries from their car, laughing as their toddler tugged on their arms. Their laughter echoed where mine once had. I thought I'd feel anger, or jealousy, or bitterness, but instead I felt something unexpected, release. That house wasn't mine anymore, and maybe it wasn't meant to be. I drove away slowly, windows down, the familiar streets rolling past. For years, that neighborhood had been the center of my life. The place where I built my family, where we gathered for cookouts, where I fixed fences and patched roofs for neighbors who felt more like family than friends. And in the end, it was also the place where betrayal cut the deepest. But betrayal doesn't define us. What we do after does. The fight with the HOA had left scars, emotional, financial, even physical. Some nights I still woke at the sound of phantom phone calls or flinched at headlights lingering outside. But those scars reminded me of something. I hadn't given up. And because I didn't give up, others didn't lose their homes. Families got to stay where they belonged. Elderly neighbors didn't have to pack up decades of memories into cardboard boxes. The community rebuilt, free from Karen's grip. Karen herself, she was serving time. The treasurer too, though his sentence was lighter. Their names became cautionary tales whispered at town meetings across the state. HOAs everywhere tightened their oversight, fearing lawsuits, fearing exposure. Funny thing about people like her, they build their power on fear. But once fear is gone, so is the power. At my new townhouse, life moved on. Planted flowers in the back, her hands stained with soil, her face lit by the same determination that had carried us through everything. Jacob graduated, got engaged. We filled that little place with laughter, arguments, quiet dinners, and new traditions. One evening, stopped by with her, she walked through the front door, glanced around the modest living room, and smiled. "It's cozy," she said. "It feels safe." That word, safe, hit me harder than I expected. Because that's what home really is, not just four walls and a roof. not even the memories tied to them. Home is where you can rest without fear, where laughter drowns out the silence, where love outweighs loss. It took me losing everything to understand that. Sometimes, late at night, I sit on the small back porch with a cup of coffee, listening to the crickets and the distant hum of traffic. The world is quieter now. My boots are still dusty from long shifts, my hands still calloused from building things that last. But the greatest thing I ever built wasn't a house. It was a family strong enough to survive losing one. If there's a lesson in all this, it's simple. Don't let silence protect the powerful. Don't let shame stop you from fighting. And don't ever let anyone convince you that your dignity is worth less than their greed. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand up and say, enough. That's what I did. I lost a house, but I kept my soul, and in the end, that was the only thing they couldn't take. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next mystery on HOA Hunter Stories.